At school, a boy was mocked when he stood up and proudly told his classmates that his grandfather was a Hollywood legend. His teacher interrupted him halfway through, asking him to stop telling wild stories. But just a few minutes later, the heavy doors of the auditorium swung open, and a man the entire world knew, none other than Sylvester Stallone, walked into the room. You could hear a pin drop. Everyone fell silent. Everything changed in that very moment. Not every story needs to be heard. Some stories deserve to be remembered. If this story touched your heart, hit a like. Tell us where you're from, and subscribe so we can keep the flame burning together. The morning fog still clung heavily over the sleepy streets of Woodland Hills as Jason Stallone pressed his forehead against the cool window of his mother's black Chevrolet Traverse. The city, half hidden in mist, stirred lazily, dog walkers bundled in sweatshirts, coffee shops switching on their neon signs, the occasional jogger weaving through quiet intersections. Jason tightened his grip on the worn straps of his backpack, his sneakers tapping nervously against the floor mat. Beside him, his mother, Olivia Stallone, hummed softly to a song on the radio, glancing at him now and then with quick, reassuring smiles. She tapped the steering wheel gently, the rhythm of her fingers steady, but her eyes shadowed with worry she didn't voice. Today wasn't just another day. It was the start of something new, a new school, a new beginning, and Jason could feel the weight of it pressing down on his chest. "You're going to do great, kiddo," Olivia said, breaking the silence as they turned onto Crestwood Drive. Her voice was warm, but carried that slight tremor she always had when she tried to be brave for both of them. Just remember what Grandpa always says. It's not about how hard you can hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. Jason gave a small nod, barely trusting himself to speak. His throat was dry, his palms slick. They pulled into the circular driveway of Crestwood Academy, the imposing red brick building looming under the gray sky. Students in navy blazers and khaki pants milled about the steps, their laughter ringing too loud, their polished shoes glinting in the early morning light. Some carried expensive backpacks emblazoned with brand names Jason had only seen in magazines. A few leaned casually against shiny black Range Rovers and Teslas, sipping oversized coffees. Jason hesitated for a beat, his heart hammering in his ears. "You're strong, Jason," Olivia said softly, reaching over to squeeze his hand once before letting go. "You come from fighters." He forced a breath into his lungs, shoved the door open, and stepped out into the crisp morning air. His blazer felt too stiff, his tie too tight. Every step across the perfect stone walkway felt too loud. He could feel the eyes turning toward him, sizing him up, filing him into whatever invisible categories existed here. Olivia watched him walk away until the crowd swallowed him whole, her chest tightening in that familiar way it always did when she had to let him face the world on his own. Inside the building, the air was filled with the sharp scent of lemon-scented polish and something faintly floral. Jason found his way to the front office, collected his schedule from a secretary who barely looked up from her computer, and navigated a maze of pristine hallways until he found room 203, his homeroom. The classroom was bright and almost aggressively tidy, with motivational posters about success and leadership lining the walls. Students sat in small clusters, laughing quietly, glancing up as Jason entered. He slipped into an empty desk near the back, shoulders hunched, wishing he could vanish into the hard plastic seat. Mrs. Langston, a tall woman with silver hair pulled into a severe bun and glasses perched low on her nose, looked up briefly and offered a tight-lipped smile. "You must be Jason Stallone," she said, scanning her clipboard. "Welcome. Find a seat." Jason muttered a "thank you" and focused on the scratches carved into the surface of his desk. The bell rang sharply. Mrs. Langston clapped her hands twice, signaling the start of class. "Today, we're starting a new project," she announced, writing the title neatly across the whiteboard, Family Legacies. "You'll each prepare a short presentation about a family member who has influenced you, someone whose life story has shaped who you are." There was a ripple of excitement across the room. Jason heard names tossed around casually. Parents who were movie producers, CEOs, Broadway actors. He sank lower into his seat, his mind already racing. When Mrs. Langston called for volunteers, Jason wasn't sure what made his hand shoot up. Maybe it was his mother's words still echoing in his head. Maybe it was the stubborn pride that burned inside him every time he thought of Grandpa. Mrs. Langston raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Jason, go ahead." Jason stood, his legs stiff, his palms clammy. He cleared his throat. "My name is Jason Stallone," he began, voice quivering slightly, but gaining strength with every word. "The person I admire most is my grandfather. He showed me what it means to work hard, to stay strong, even when things seem impossible. He taught me that success isn't about luck. It's about getting back up when you've been knocked down." He paused, took a breath. "My grandfather is Sylvester Stallone." For a second, there was silence so thick it buzzed in his ears. Then came the laughter. It started small, a snicker from the left side of the room, and then spread like wildfire. A boy near the front slapped his desk and guffawed. Another girl whispered loudly enough for Jason to hear, "Yeah, sure, and my grandpa's Tom Cruise." Even Mrs. Langston smiled thinly, a barely concealed smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Let's be respectful," she said, though her tone carried a hint of indulgent disbelief. Jason's face flamed, his hands balled into fists at his sides. "It's true," he said, but his voice sounded small against the tide of laughter. He sat down heavily, staring at the scratch marks on his desk as if they might open and swallow him whole. The rest of the class blurred. Jason barely heard the next presentations, barely noticed the sidelong glances, the whispered jokes. At lunch, he sat alone under a sprawling oak tree in the courtyard, poking at the sandwich his mother had made him. Across the quad, Trevor Matthews, the ringleader of the morning's laughter, mimed lifting dumbbells, flexing his skinny arms in an exaggerated impression of Rocky Balboa. His friends howled with laughter. Jason looked down at his tray, willing the lump in his throat to disappear. He thought about his grandfather's voice, gravelly and certain. "Life's not about how hard you can hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward." Jason didn't know if he had that kind of strength, but he knew he wanted to try. The next morning, Jason shuffled through the school gates, his head down, the laughter from yesterday, still echoing in his mind like a bad dream he couldn't shake off. He barely heard the buzz of conversation around him, the easy chatter of classmates, swapping weekend plans and TikTok gossip. As he made his way toward the auditorium for the Friday assembly, he could already feel the sidelong glances, the barely suppressed grins. The big event of the week was the Family Legacy Assembly, where students would give short speeches or invite a family member to share their story. Jason knew better than to expect much. After yesterday, he figured the best he could hope for was to survive the morning without becoming the punchline again. He slipped into a seat near the back of the grand auditorium, the old wooden chairs creaking under him. High above, banners in maroon and gold swayed gently in the draft from the air conditioning. The lights were dimmed except for the stage, where a podium stood ready, a microphone gleaming under the spotlight. Students milled around, settling into seats, their chatter a low rumble that filled the cavernous room. Mrs. Langston appeared on stage, her clipboard clutched tightly in one hand, and tapped the microphone to quiet the crowd. "Good morning, Crestwood," she said, her voice overly cheerful. "Today we celebrate the people who helped shape us, the people whose legacies we carry forward." She beamed at the audience. "Some of you have prepared speeches. Some have invited guests. We're excited to hear all your stories." Jason sank lower into his chair, willing himself invisible. He didn't even know why he had agreed to show up. Maybe because his mom had insisted. Maybe because some stubborn spark inside him refused to let yesterday's laughter be the last word. The first few presentations rolled by. Charlotte Abernathy talking about her father, a famous entertainment lawyer. Ethan Chen introducing his mother, a biotech CEO. The crowd clapped politely, some more genuinely than others. Jason tried to focus on the stage, but his mind kept drifting, replaying every cruel joke from the day before. Halfway through the program, Mrs. Langston returned to the podium, adjusting her glasses. "Our next student is Jason Stallone," she said, her tone carefully neutral. A ripple of whispers moved through the auditorium. Some students nudged each other. A few chuckles rose from the back rows. Jason forced himself to stand, legs trembling slightly, and made his way toward the stage. He climbed the steps slowly, every footfall sounding far too loud in his ears. Standing at the microphone, he cleared his throat, his heart hammering so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. "Good morning," he began, voice tight but steady. "My name is Jason Stallone. Yesterday, I told my classmates that my grandfather is Sylvester Stallone." More muffled laughter rolled through the audience. Jason pressed on. "Most people didn't believe me. I get it. It sounds crazy. It sounds like something you'd make up to get attention. But it's true. And not because he's famous. That's not why I look up to him." He paused, the words catching for a moment in his throat. He thought of his grandfather's rough hands, his gravelly voice, the quiet strength in his eyes. "I look up to him because he never quit. Because when everyone else said he couldn't make it, he kept going. Because he taught me that real strength isn't about looking tough. It's about getting back up when the world knocks you down." The room was silent now, though Jason could still feel the skepticism hanging heavy in the air. He lowered the microphone and turned to leave the stage, wishing he could melt into the shadows. But just as he reached the top step, the heavy double doors at the back of the auditorium swung open with a loud creak that echoed through the hushed room. Every head turned. There, standing framed in the doorway, was a man in a black leather jacket, jeans, and a simple baseball cap, pulled low over his forehead. Even without seeing his face clearly, there was no mistaking that unmistakable presence, the way he carried himself with a quiet, undeniable authority. A murmur swept through the auditorium like wildfire, growing louder with every passing second. The man strode forward, each step deliberate, casual, as if he belonged there. And he did. As he neared the stage, he removed his cap, revealing the familiar rugged face that had graced movie screens for decades. Sylvester Stallone. Mrs. Langston's clipboard slipped from her fingers and hit the floor with a loud clatter. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Stallone climbed the stage steps with a grace that belied his years, taking the microphone from its stand. He turned to the stunned audience and smiled that half-crooked, instantly recognizable grin. "Morning, everybody," he said, his voice low and gravelly, instantly commanding the full attention of the room. "I hear there's been a little confusion about my grandson." He threw a wink at Jason, who stood frozen just a few feet away, his mouth slightly open in disbelief. Stallone turned back to the crowd. "Let me make something real clear. Jason Stallone is my grandson, blood of my blood." He placed a hand on Jason's shoulder, squeezing firmly. "And he's tougher than most people twice his size." The room erupted, not with laughter this time, but with a stunned, almost reverent silence. Stallone chuckled, shaking his head slightly. "When I started out, nobody believed in me either. Said I talked funny, looked funny, didn't have what it took. But the one thing I had was heart. And heart," he said, thumping his chest with a closed fist, "beats talent any day of the week." He let that sink in before continuing. "Jason's got that heart, more than most people I know. And let me tell you, that's something you can't fake. That's something you earn." Applause began, tentative at first, then swelling to a full roar. Students stood up, parents craned their necks to get a better look. Even Mrs. Langston was clapping, her cheeks flushed deep red. Jason stood frozen in place, overwhelmed, his heart so full he thought it might burst. Stallone leaned down slightly, speaking just loud enough for Jason to hear. "Told you, kid, it's not about them. It's about you." Jason nodded, blinking rapidly, fighting the stinging in his eyes. He had never felt prouder in his entire life, not because his grandfather was famous, but because his grandfather had believed in him enough to show up. As Stallone handed the microphone back to Mrs. Langston, who stammered out a shaky thank you, he turned to Jason one last time, clapped him warmly on the back, and gave him a small nod of approval. Jason walked back to his seat through an aisle of stunned faces, but he didn't feel small anymore. He felt 10 feet tall. The whispers that followed him now weren't mocking. They were awed, respectful, genuine. He caught Trevor Matthews staring at him with a look that was equal parts shock and sheepishness. Jason offered a small, lopsided grin, not out of spite, but out of something deeper, understanding, forgiveness, because Jason Stallone knew now that the only approval he had ever needed was already his. And the rest? Well, the rest would catch up eventually. The next few days at Crestwood Academy felt different in a way Jason could barely describe. He still walked the same hallways, still slid into the same stiff-backed desk in room 203 every morning. But something fundamental had shifted, like the earth itself had tilted slightly beneath his feet. The kids who used to snicker behind their hands when he walked by now nodded at him in the halls, or offered awkward, uncertain smiles. A few even went so far as to start conversations, tentative at first, as if testing the waters. Trevor Matthews, the boy who had laughed the loudest, approached him during lunch a few days later. Jason was sitting under the big oak tree again, flipping through a worn paperback when he noticed Trevor standing there, shifting awkwardly from foot to foot. "Hey, Jason," Trevor began, scratching the back of his neck. "Listen, man, about before. I guess I was being kind of a jerk." Jason looked up, the sun catching the gold lettering on the book's cover. For a moment, he said nothing, just watching Trevor fumble with his words. "I mean," Trevor continued, "it's not every day you meet someone whose grandpa is like an actual legend." He gave a weak laugh, the cocky bravado gone. "So, yeah, sorry." Jason closed his book slowly, studying Trevor's face. There was something real in his eyes now. Not pity, not fake friendliness, something more like respect. Jason shrugged lightly. "It's cool," he said, offering a small smile. "Takes guts to apologize." Trevor looked relieved. He hesitated a second longer, then asked, "You want to come shoot hoops after school? A bunch of us are meeting at the gym." Jason considered it. A month ago, he would have said no without hesitation, but today felt different. He tucked the book into his backpack and stood up. "Yeah," he said, "sounds good." Word about Sylvester Stallone's surprise visit had spread beyond just the school. Local blogs picked up the story, and one afternoon, Jason's mom showed him a clip from the news, the two of them laughing at how serious the reporters made it all sound. Olivia ruffled his hair as he watched, pride shining in her eyes. "You're becoming a bit of a celebrity yourself, kiddo," she teased. Jason rolled his eyes but couldn't help smiling. It wasn't the attention he cared about. It was the feeling that, for once, he wasn't invisible. That he was seen for who he truly was, not because of a famous name, but because he had stood up, even when it would have been easier to stay silent. At school, Mrs. Langston also seemed to undergo a quiet transformation. She still maintained her tight schedules and clipped instructions, but there was a subtle softening in the way she spoke to Jason now. She called on him more often in class, listened carefully when he answered, even offered a rare, genuine smile once when he nailed a tough history question. One afternoon, after the last bell had rung and the classroom was emptying, she stopped Jason as he gathered his things. "Jason," she said, adjusting her glasses, "I wanted to tell you, your presentation, it was brave. It's not easy standing up in front of a crowd like that, especially when you know they might not believe you." Jason nodded, unsure what to say. Mrs. Langston hesitated, then added, almost grudgingly, "You reminded me why we do this project in the first place." Jason offered a small, surprised smile. "Thanks, Mrs. Langston." As he left the room, the weight he hadn't even realized he was carrying seemed to lift a little more. Life at home was easier too. The tension that had hung over their small apartment, the quiet worry in his mom's eyes every time he came home looking defeated, had melted away. Dinners were filled with laughter now, with Jason telling stories from school, and Olivia teasing him mercilessly about the sudden influx of friend requests on his phone. Even Grandpa Sylvester called more often, his voice warm and crackling through the old cordless phone they still used. He always ended every conversation the same way. "Keep punching, kid. Life's a tough ring, but you're tougher." A few weeks later, the school announced the formation of a new student club, the Grit Club, focused on resilience, perseverance, and leadership. Jason's name was the first on the roster, and when the principal handed him the microphone at the first meeting, Jason didn't hesitate. He stood before the gathered students, some he barely knew, some who had once laughed at him, and spoke about what it meant to get knocked down and keep getting back up. He talked about how real strength wasn't about being the loudest in the room or the most popular, but about staying true to yourself, even when it's hard. His words weren't fancy. He wasn't a natural orator, but they came from somewhere real, and that made all the difference. When he finished, the applause was loud and genuine. Later that evening, Jason sat on the small balcony outside their apartment. The city spread out before him in a tapestry of blinking lights. His mom joined him, 2 mugs of hot chocolate in her hands. She passed him one and settled into the chair beside him. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. The night cool but not cold, the stars winking overhead. "You've changed," Olivia said quietly, smiling into her mug. "You're standing taller these days." Jason looked out at the city, thinking about everything that had happened, the laughter, the humiliation, the vindication, the growth. "I guess I had to fall a little to figure out how to stand," he said. Olivia chuckled softly. "That's a good way of putting it." She leaned over and kissed the top of his head, just like she used to when he was little. "I'm proud of you, Jace. Your grandfather's proud too. You made your own name. That's something no one can take from you." Jason smiled, a deep, genuine smile that came from somewhere unshakable inside him. He took a sip of his hot chocolate, feeling its warmth spread through his chest. Somewhere far off, a siren wailed, a dog barked, life went on. But in that small, perfect moment, Jason knew exactly who he was. Not just a Stallone, not just someone riding the coattails of a famous name. He was Jason, and he had earned his place in the world the hard way, by getting up when it mattered most. The next morning, as he walked into Crestwood Academy, his backpack slung casually over one shoulder, he didn't keep his head down. He moved through the halls with quiet confidence, greeting classmates with a nod, smiling easily at teachers. Trevor called out to him from across the courtyard, waving him over to join a game of pickup basketball. Jason jogged over without hesitation. As he dribbled the ball, laughing with the other kids under the warm California sun, he realized something he hadn't understood before. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone else. It never had been. It was about proving it to himself. And he had. He really had.